Hi there. In today's video, we are going to look at 5 ways to improve academic essay writing. We are talking specifically about formal writing, maybe business writing or academic writing. So, let's get started. My first tip on how to improve writing is do not use contractions. And again, this is for academic writing. So, what is a contraction? Words like don't, can't, shouldn't, couldn't, wouldn't, isn't, haven't, and hasn't. These are the short forms of words. For example, don't is the contraction of do not. It's better to write out the full word in academic and formal business writing. So instead of don't, use do not. Instead of can't, use cannot. Shouldn't becomes should not. Couldn't becomes could not. Wouldn't becomes would not. Isn't becomes is not. Haven't becomes have not, and hasn't becomes has not. So avoid using these contractions and always use the full forms instead. So now let's look at tip number 2. Tip number 2 is avoid using there is or there are. Why do we avoid there is or there are? Well, one of the reasons is that when we write, we want our ideas to be clear and concise. This means we don't want long, unnecessary sentences. Instead, we want our sentences to be direct and to the point. Using there are adds extra words that aren't needed. Let's look at an example. There are many issues that students face at university. This is a sentence, but if I wanted to improve it and make it more appropriate for academic writing, I would change it. I'd remove there are and rewrite it as students face many issues at university. See? You don't need there is or there are. A second example, there are many development projects that the UN supports. Again, we don't need there are. We could simply change it to the UN supports many development projects. By getting rid of there is and there are, your sentences become stronger and more to the point. So, tip number 3 is avoid certain words. Don't use words in academic writing such as really, very, a lot, and so. These words weaken your writing. Your writing isn't as strong if you use these types of words. So let's look at some examples. Many students think university is very hard. How could I improve this sentence? Well, instead of using very hard, just use a stronger word in the first place. Say, many students think university is difficult. Now let's look at sentence B. Bill 399 is really controversial. We could simply say, Bill 399 is controversial. The sentence sounds better and it sounds more formal. Another example, a lot of the students. Instead of using a lot, we could use the word many students. We use many if we can count the noun, if it's countable. So instead of saying a lot, use many. Or if the noun is not countable, if it's a non-count noun, we can use much. So, many and much are both words that are better to use than a lot. And again, the rule is, avoid the usage of really, very, a lot, and so. So, our fourth tip when it comes to academic writing is about the passive voice. Unless you are in the sciences, it's okay to use the passive voice. But don't use it too much. It's normal and acceptable in scientific writing, and I will explain what that is in a second. However, if you are studying humanities, social sciences, history, psychology, or similar subjects, do not use the passive voice. Instead, use the active voice. For most university writing, the active voice is preferred. So what is the passive voice, and what is the active voice? Here's an example of the passive voice. Healthcare reforms were implemented by Trump. Notice that first we have a form of the verb to be, and then we have the past participle of implement, in this case, implemented. You can see the ed at the end. Oftentimes, we also have the word by, followed by someone or something. So this is an example of a passive voice sentence. Healthcare reforms were implemented by Trump. Now, what's the problem with using the passive voice? Well, it takes away the focus on the fact that Trump is the one who implemented the reforms. The sentence feels weak and a bit awkward. It would be much better to write it with the actor, the person performing the action, at the forefront. For example, Trump implemented healthcare reforms. This is the active voice. If you can, structure your sentence with the subject first, followed by the verb, and then the object. This is much stronger and clearer than using the passive voice. So here's another example of this. If I were writing in the passive voice, I would say, the war was. So here we have a form of the be verb, won, which is the past participle of win, followed by the key word by, and then the French. The war was won by the French. This is, once again, a passive voice sentence. While it's grammatically correct, it's still a bit weak. In academic writing, we aim for strong sentences, and a strong sentence places the actor, or the person performing the action, at the beginning. Instead, a better sentence would be, the French won the war. And that's the difference. Strong, active sentences create a more impactful impression. So the final tip in this video is, when you write academically, use strong verbs. So what is a strong verb and what is a weak verb? Let me give you an example. I could say, he gave assistance to my friend. This is a very weak way of expressing the idea. In a stronger way, I could simply say, he assisted my friend. So what's the difference between these two sentences? Well, in the first sentence, assistance is a noun. A better way to write this sentence, anytime you have a verb and a noun, is to look at the noun and see if it could be used as a verb on its own. If it can, use the verb form instead. For example, instead of saying, he gave assistance, say, he assisted. This makes the sentence stronger and more direct. Let's look at another example. So here I have a weak verb, made an objection. He made an objection. So again we have a verb, made, and then a noun, objection. But objection can be its own verb. To make it stronger, we get rid of made and turn objection into its verbal form, objected. He objected. So, he objected is better than he made an objection. Another example. Here we have our example of the weak verb. She conducted an investigation. Well, when I look here, I see the word investigation, and I think, does this noun have a verb form? Well, yes, it does. Investigate. So instead of saying conduct an investigation, say she investigated something. It's a lot better. It's stronger. Finally, for our fourth example, the weak verb is did an audit. They did an audit. They did an audit on someone. So again, I see the word audit. So here's a verb and here's a noun. When I look at this noun, I think audit. Is there a verb form of the word audit? Yes, there is. Wesley Snipes was audited. But again, I told you not to use a passive, so I could say, the government audited Wesley Snipes. So there you have it. 5 tips that will quickly improve your academic writing. Until next time.